Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Greg Decker. Give yourselves a hand, by the way, and I'll tell you why. Together, you set a record for the most sold out session of the Greenbuild conference. So how cool. Yes. So hope they brought in enough chairs. In your case, that they brought enough rubber balls. How are those? Those have been uber popular. No. It was like a concert. Those guys came in early to sit on the balls, and some of you have the other bouncy things, and there's other toys in here as well. So, well, again, fantastic. We have some neat material for you, and I'm excited to get into it. So if you're ready, let's talk about the future of work. Are you ready? All right, good deal. Here's some of the stuff that we're going to learn, those things as well. Okay. The Jetsons was written over 50 years ago, and this remarkable show still runs today. And in it, these writers envisioned a future with remarkable things, right? Where you had Rosie the robot and transporter tubes, dogs that walked on treadmills, you had the flying car. And yet they had a particular belief that family would still matter, and George would still commute. Remember that? To the office he'd go. So in the late 60s, early 70s, when I watched that show, I'm watching it on an enormous console TV, which in reality is probably about this big, right? And in George's house, he had a TV almost that big, where his boss, remember his boss's name? Mr. Spacely, yes, he could appear at any time to just yell at George. Well, with that level of convenience, don't you kind of wonder why George would go in for more of it? So here's our first opportunity for you to put your opinion in here. How's this work? You go to that number, get out your phone. Oh, here's your chance to, most speakers will say, put your phones away. Here's your chance to bring yours out. So go to that number, 22333, and text, yes, George will still commute by putting in that number, or no, text in the other number. So we'll give you about a minute to see what some of your numbers are. So far, it's 100% yeses. Go ahead, get out your phones, put in some votes. This is not going to affect the American Idol finals in any way. This is fascinating. So, no, he will not still commute. Has a gain on it right now. Picking up some more yeses. A little bit more. A lot of prognosticators out here. 44 to 56, give it just a sec. Approaching half and half. Yes, he's going to commute. No, he won't. What you're really deciding is, will we live in a virtual world, or will we still have material girls? Hey, look at this. Still about there. Well, cool. And I think you can continue to text. We have a way to look at that number later, but thank you for your participation already. So the future is a tricky thing. And here are some people who had some opinions about it, and let's see if you can figure out what they said. We can play this a little bit like Jeopardy. You're going to have to put your answer in the form of a question. Here's Niels Bohr, world-famous physicist, saying prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about... in the form of a question. What is the future? Very, very good. Now you know how we're going to play this. Let's try another one. So you have to picture back in the late 1800s, and they had just built the Eiffel Tower, which the local Parisians thought should be taken down after the show. But this is about something else. Oxford University sent Dr. Wilson to this affair, and he wrote to the world press, when the Paris exhibition closes, blank will close with it, and no more will be heard of it. Eiffel Tower was certainly one of them, right. What did Dr. Wilson go and talk about? There's hundreds of them in this room. What is the electric light? He wrote, why would we put wires into homes when it's so easy to carry kerosene? All right. Time Magazine, 1966, remote blank, while entirely feasible, will flop. Remote control, close, good. So picture this time where stores were leaving downtowns to head out to these glorious suburbs remote shopping. Why would we use catalogs when we're going to have a shopping mall right in your backyard? Beautiful thing. Now, the main media was having a hard time predicting the future anyway. So imagine the 1960s. You and your family are trying to pick the perfect vacation. Newsweek says for the tourist who wants to get away from it all, they predicted safaris in blank. What is Vietnam? Of course. Why wouldn't you? All right. So Ken Olsen should have known better. He was chairman, founder of DEC. Here he is. He's speaking to the World Future Society in 1977, not really that long ago. There's no reason for any individual to have a blank in his home. What is the computer? In fact, do you remember the number that he thought would fill the world? 5. Yeah. 5 should do it. Mm-hmm. And finally here. So here's Steve Ballmer. He's CEO of Microsoft. 07, right? This is recent past. He's speaking at a town hall meeting to key employees and to their investors. There's no chance that the blank is going to get any significant market share. Yeah. What is the iPhone? He stood famously on a stage, not unlike this one, and said, "There's not even any buttons." So it's tricky. So these are the customers where I've spent really the majority of my time over the last 3 years. Great places, and they're brands that you recognize, right? Super companies, wonderful people. They're struggling with the same thing, though, diverse as they are. They're all struggling with this number, the 1.17 billion. Because 1.17 billion is what you get when you start looking for answers to the most common question we get in strategy work: what's going on in the future? What's next, right? There's Gen Y and there's mobility and all these kinds of things. So the most common way, right, to look for an answer is to Google search for it under new ways of work. You get over 1 billion responses in about 1/3 of a second. Now they all have the same information, so you would think they would agree. Let's take a look. Here's Harvard Business Review. Look how surprised they sound that a designer could come up with a workplace that seemed helpful. Not so The Guardian in the UK, same day, they would ban all this open office stuff. Let's put the walls back in. Why? Because open office plans suck. Yes. Thanks, consumerist. Are we sure? Yes, we have data, apparently. And by the way, 3 of those 24 ways are the people who sit by you. They know who you are, and so do you. Right? All right. Here's Fast Company saying, look, at this, these things kind of go on a pendulum. It swings back and forth. That's probably true. I wrote this article about magnetic workplaces. What are some offices where people actually want to be? What would that look like? So the 1.7 billion we just talked about, here's some other things that are going on. 70%. That's from the latest Gallup poll figures that suggest that about 70% of working people feel disconnected. They don't feel empowered by their company's goals. They're disengaged, right? So think back to a time period not too long ago where you had Best Buy thriving and Yahoo and the government's Office of Personnel Management. They all embraced something, a work from anywhere policy called ROW. And that ran for a number of years. You could work from anywhere, and Yahoo was really into it. Marissa Mayer came on board as CEO. She loves data and looks at her data of people who work from just anywhere and sees that about 70% of them aren't even logging into the system anymore. That's disengagement. Right? So picture this. Could this section stand up? And y'all. People on the balls get a pass. And all of you too, right? So look at all those empty chairs. That's considered to be the level of disengagement among office employees. And if you walk through a typical office place anywhere in the world right now, about 70% of the workstations are empty. People might be in the building, but they're somewhere else actively doing something else. We'll talk a little bit about that. So yay, good job, standers. Where else could you get applause for simply not sitting? That's good. 70 square feet. That's the goal of square feet per person at General Electric. When I joined the industry, they were at about, would you guess, 350? So that's a shift. Point 7, that's workstations per person at Citigroup. So at Citi, for every 1,000 employees, how many workstations do they have? I'm looking for the math table. 700, good. Point 2, that's workstations per person at Accenture. Previous recession, so picture 2008 to 2011, first thousands, ultimately millions of people lost their jobs. 54% of them getting laid off were baby boomers, 38% were Gen X, only about 8% were Gen Y. Now companies are rehiring. Flew into Seattle, clear day, you could see downtown. Almost 60 construction cranes in downtown Seattle alone. In Denver looks like that, in Toronto, in San Francisco. On the rehiring rate, only about 6% of the jobs are going to baby boomers, over 60% are going to Gen Y. That's part of why this topic is such a big one right now, because it's happening even faster than we thought it was going to. Thought it was going to be about a half and half workforce, like millennial to the rest, by the end of 2019, now end of this year. But look at this. Hiring managers tend to be older, and they talk mainly about money and potential. And if you look at those lighter green bars, that's the incoming generation. Yes, they want to be paid, but they're very, very interested in who am I going to work with, who am I going to be around, what's the work like, those kinds of things, more of a pursuit of meaning. A lot of reasons for why this might have occurred, but I can tell you when it started. It was June 20, 1987. I got married, had these two. They're now 21 and 24, and if you give them jobs, and please do, but if you put them to work in those 5-foot-tall, fabric-covered cubicle boxes, they're going to starve. One of them is going to starve emotionally, mentally. The other one could just starve. He'll forget to come out. He'll be, hey, Dad, getting hungry in here, so cold. Our problem is bigger than millennials starving in their cubicles. It's that we have a generation that's retiring and they're heading for palm trees. So how are we going to help all this knowledge transfer if we're putting people to work in highly isolated ways? So this is all part of why we have these pressures on change. So some people are talking about millennials starving in cubicles. Others are talking about 700 million. Because about 700 million is what you get when you search for the other big question we get asked about, one we're talking a lot about at this conference, well-being at work. Over 700 million responses in about half a second. And interesting things and different opinions in there too, and you're hearing a lot of them along this week. But here's one you'll hear a great deal about here, especially in an election year. This graph shows you where we're spending our money as it relates to healthcare. Almost all of it is going into where are the hospitals, what's in the hospitals, and how are we going to pay for the hospitals. But when you look at what's actually impacting your health, that's a tiny fraction of what matters. What matters most is who are you, where are you, and what are you doing all day. In fact, for you to find out who your mother slept with, to make you, okay, is twice as important as where are the hospitals and what's in them. And what you do all day is 5 times more important. So if you think of leaders of every organization, they've got one of their department heads showing up with 100 white papers saying, we need to take down these cube walls so my people can be more innovative. And another department head is showing up saying, we need to put all the doors back in because our people can't concentrate or think anymore. And then another department head runs up, and this one, by the way, has 120 white papers. And then someone shows up here with now a huge stack of papers saying, you know what, we need to put everybody on red rolly balls and treadmills all day to be healthier, right? So they're not all right and they're not all wrong. But right now, no one's really praying for more white papers. Are you? Right? They're with 1.17 billion opinions on the big questions, they're praying for help. They're looking for discernment about how to apply these kinds of things. And so you're in for a treat. Our next speaker is Joanna Frank, and she is the executive director of the Center for Active Design. And please welcome her as she talks about how are we going to sort these things out. Great.
Thank you.
Joanna.
Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Follow that, right? So I'm going to be talking a lot about how to reach those outcomes. So I usually start here because there is no doubt at this point that the design of our buildings, our streets, the places we live has a profound impact on our behavior. And I can say that there's no doubt because there's a whole body of evidence. We have evidence, we have metrics, we've been studying this for a long time. So we can start to actually sort out what's working, what's not working. I don't really need to talk about why that's not working, probably, following just now. So how do we take the evidence base and how do we really translate it to inform design? We've done this before. You guys did it with sustainability. So how do we do it again to really look at impacting health? The other place that we can look at, we can certainly look at sustainability as a great precedent, but we can also look at history, because this is not the first time that we've had a big health crisis and we've used design to impact that health crisis. So if we go back more than 100 years, the majority of people were dying from infectious disease. This got really serious, didn't it, really quickly. So the majority of people were dying of infectious disease, but the response of the government wasn't, you need to individually go out and treat yourself for that disease. The response in New York was one of a holistic approach to solving it. So they looked at policy, zoning changes. You guys actually know what that is, I don't need to explain. So zoning changes were used. They created transportation systems, a subway system that allowed for the very overcrowded downtown Manhattan for the people to be able to spread out. They also created minimum design standards. The Tenement House Act created minimum design standards for housing, where you have to have a window in a bedroom, you have to have light and air. So all of these approaches were used to address infectious disease. The other pieces, we created parks and created reservoirs for clean water. And the amazing impact on infectious disease was by 1940, you see that the numbers have completely flipped. Infectious disease was down to 11%. But we do have to die of something, and we started dying of chronic disease. So in the 1940s, the other big social issue that was happening was that people started to use cars. We started to design for cars. We also started to design for elevators and escalators. And as we became more efficient at designing for cars, we're very good at changing, actually. So we changed our cities, we changed our streets to accommodate cars. But as we did so, we started to design physical activity out of our daily lives. So the rate of walking and biking starts to drop off precipitously. And as you see, the numbers in the circles are the numbers of obese and overweight adults. And they are just continuing to increase. So as we do less exercise, the obesity rates are continuing, which brings us to today. At this point, physical inactivity has actually now replaced smoking as the largest cause of preventable death. You've probably heard the expression, sitting is the new smoking. It is. And this is global. This is not just in the US, this is a global number. The other thing that's happening is that when we continue to model out obesity rates, and unfortunately the numbers that came out last week continue this trend, we will have 86% of our adult population will be obese or overweight by 2030, which is pretty soon. So if we were to do that standing exercise again, we'd be even further around the room. And that has profound impacts not just on people's health, but also it has profound impacts on our economic ability. And then the other thing that's just, in case that isn't enough, 10-year-olds today have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. So in case the other number didn't startle you, maybe that one will. So it's time to change. It's time to really reverse this issue. And we're talking about workplace. Another number that's really kind of begun to grow over the years is this idea that sedentary behavior, so sitting, actually has a direct relationship to health, which is separate from being physically active. So if you sit all day and you're physically active, one doesn't counter affect the other. And you can see these numbers are about 2-hour increases in sitting. So you're not talking about very much, and yet the relationship to increasing risk of chronic disease is really startling. And these are all things that we can do something about, and we can use design and we can use our buildings to really impact that. So what we do at the center is that we take all of those white papers, we take all of that evidence, all of that data, and we actually translate it into practical design strategies so that you don't have to. We create guidebooks, we create toolkits that really kind of create those practical design strategies that have this basis in evidence. New York City was the first to do this. They published a set of active design guidelines in 2010. The center was actually started to promote this thinking. And just recently, we did this Building Healthy Places Toolkit, which was specifically for the real estate development community, and really answers the question, if I'm going to do like 10 things, what are the 10 things that I should do? And so what we were able to do with this is we actually developed 21 recommendations. Each recommendation has either 2 longitudinal or 5 cross-sectional studies behind it. And it was really important to us that we draw a line and we say, this is the bar, this is what we consider to be evidence-based. And so that's what we do. That's how we make this a little more fathomable, a bit of a roadmap on how to actually build to support health. We put it in these buckets. We look at recreation, transportation, buildings, and then food access, because we know that these are the areas that affect not just your physical health, but also your emotional health. And many of the design strategies that get you to move more also definitely have a positive impact on your emotional health as well. And then to get to kind of the future of workplaces, what we've seen in the past with workplace is that there's a lot of interest in employers in the well-being of their employees. But up till now, that has really been demonstrated through programming, having wellness programs, having all kinds of ideas of what might work. But they're temporary, and they require kind of organization and so on. And there's been this real opportunity that has been missed up until now, and that is, how do we design our workplaces so that you can become physically active day to day, your daily routines? You have an interconnecting stair. You have an office which is located next to a bike path, and a culture in an office that supports cycling or walking, or whatever your priorities are. And something we were talking about earlier is, I was saying we do evidence-based design, but actually what we do is outcome-based design. Because really, what we want to hear is, what do you need to solve? What does your population, what do your workforce need? What do they prioritize? What's their age? What are their health risks? What are you doing day to day? Because the solutions will all be very specific to your place of work or your client, depending on who you are. But the tools we use in the evidence space is the same. So how do we design a space that we can pretty much predict is going to affect those outcomes? And when we talk about designing for workplaces, we're not just talking about your office, we're also talking about how you get there. Because look how many hours a day we spend in work or getting to work. It's a huge amount of our time. It's more than we do anything else except sleeping. And so we're talking about commuting as well. And there's great evidence around like an active commute, whether it's walking or biking or even taking public transport, actually has both an increase in your physical activity, but also gives pleasure. Like biking and walking actually, we can demonstrate, has a positive impact on your emotional state. The picture in the middle of everybody sitting along a line, working on the computers is very familiar to all of us, but it doesn't have to be that way. Those are laptops. They don't have to be tethered to the same spaces. So there are all these new opportunities. We can really begin to design our workplaces to respond directly to the needs of the people who are working in them. Stress is a big issue. We talk about emotional health, and stress is a big issue not just for health, but also for the cost that lost work actually is, that business is incurring from lost work. They're in the billions. $300 billion for lost work. So even if it costs a little bit more to design your office space to give people options as far as where they work and if they move around a space, it's nothing compared to that 300 billion mark. So there is absolutely a cost to doing nothing, both a cost to the business, a cost to the individual working in the business, and there is a cost to society. There's a bigger cost. Here's some other crazy numbers. 3 out of 4 dollars spent on healthcare are associated with chronic disease. And we can reduce the risk of chronic disease by increasing physical activity and by making our diet healthier. And we can use design to actually give people those opportunities. If I live in a place where I have no shops that sell healthy food, I have no bike lanes, I have no sidewalks, and I can only drive to my office, which has an elevator and the stairs are tucked away somewhere, and I don't have access on every floor, I don't have options. All we're talking about here is provide people the options to be physically active, and people will begin to make those choices themselves. So more crazy numbers, and a majority of financial chiefs say that the cost of healthcare is their number one concern. So this has a direct impact on business. Productivity, we don't exactly have all the numbers here on how one relates to the other. We know they do. This is definitely a work in progress. We are at the moment doing a book on specifically design guidelines for the workplace, and so we are still translating this evidence. We don't have all of the solutions. Productivity is definitely related to people's emotional health, their physical health, so there's a correlation. We will establish it or not, but we will go where the evidence takes us on this one. So I'm just going to give you a couple of ideas about what we're talking about as far as design. I don't know how many designers there are in the room compared to engineers, but everybody has a place. So when we're talking about alleviating stress, one of the strongest evidence bases is around access to nature. So views of nature, physical access to nature, bringing plants into the office space. All of these things have a demonstrated impact on people's mental health, and they alleviate stress. It's a pretty simple thing to do, and it's amazing how effective it is. The other piece that we look at is around active commuting. There's a lot of evidence base around that. But the commuting is not just getting to work, but also providing the support within a workplace that allows someone to walk, that there's showers, there's somewhere to put the bike, and that it's okay to do it. You know, you have to have a culture within the office space that actually welcomes people to bring their bikes. You can't just say you can ride to work. You actually have to mean it, and you have to design the spaces to allow for it. Where you locate your business obviously has a very big impact on the opportunities that you have to be near public transportation. So locating business, if you have that as an option, really to consider transportation and destinations within walking distance of your place. So you are a unique crowd. We talk to a lot of different people, but you guys have already done this. You guys have already taken sustainability and made it mainstream. And what we're really asking today is, how do we work with all of you and make health a priority in the same way that sustainability has become a priority? Nobody would question that design and building has an impact on sustainability. We would like to get to the same point that everybody understands fundamentally that the design and the buildings that they are responsible for has an impact on people's behavior. So let's do what we can to actually support people's health. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett. Thank you very much.
So when I first started preparing for this presentation, I saw Greg's George Jetson. He challenged me. He said, find an American icon that has as great impact as the Jetsons. And so I came up with Maxwell Smart, and as I started to think about this guy actually predicted the future. So my hypothesis for all of you that I'm going to present to you is that this guy was right, and at the very end of my section, I'll ask you a second poll question, and you can either tell me I'm full of it or not. So let's get started. Oh, wrong way. So first question for all of you. Put yourself in a mindset where we've all done an incredible job on addressing HVAC, we've done chilled beams, we have a solar chimney, naturally ventilated. What percentage of the pie of total energy do plug loads represent? 50? 45? That's pretty good. So think about this, 40%. If you want to know where the next frontier of sustainability is, it's sitting in our plug loads. As we get better and better and better technologies, the opportunity starts to expand into plug loads. So here's a simple question. How many IT folks are there in the room? Why? Why aren't they here, right? So let's think about that for a second. So let's go back to the history of plug loads. And remember this thing? I remember when my mom sat up there in our kitchen and she wrote her thesis on one of these, and I learned swear words every time she made a mistake, all right? And these things were hot, they were loud, they had just an incredible VOC aroma of that tape as it started to go through. It was incredible. And then what happened? Well, a computer came along and we had to put them all in cubicles because people couldn't move around, right? We got these old CRT monitors that use more energy than the old typewriters, and we put them in front of these large towers and mainframe computers. And then in 1995, laptops came around. And this is my first laptop. It was 20 pounds, all right? I took it to class. It wouldn't last an entire lecture. It was battery powered about 30 minutes. The thing just didn't work, right? And then what happened? Well, gosh, laptops actually became feasible. And we started to get tablets. And then in 2012, this thing called the cloud came around and said, gosh, we don't even need a data center in the building anymore. We can actually put our computers underground out in an old mine in Colorado and use fiber optics to get it. We don't even need to have this plug load sitting in our building anymore. And then the glass holes came along, right? And they said, I don't even need a big monitor anymore. I just need one really small, tiny one. And watches came along, right? So I don't even need my cell phone anymore, that old thing that Greg has. Oh, come on, right? You got it on your watch now, right? He wasn't so wrong, was he, right? So what's the common theme about all that technology? It's using less and less and less power. So let's go back to that pie chart. So here's one of our projects, a great, incredible green building. And we took a look at this and said, gosh, we're getting to the point now where we really want to improve energy efficiency. We can spend $1 million to get one more 1%, or we can put that $1 million in our IT equipment. And we can take our plug loads and do that to them. Simply by involving the IT designers in the workplace design standards, that means I can spend less money on my HVAC system. I can download the whole thing. And they're geeks, so let's turn it into a game, right? Let's go and find a way to eat the plug loads. So there's got this great soapbox down here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand on this thing, and I'm going to go back to Tom in my office and ask him to get me a soapbox. So these things are too cool. But here's the reality. If we're going to get to the next stage in energy efficiency in our office, then we better start bringing those geeks back into the design process. Because they can purchase simple Energy Star equipment, we can move to cloud-based equipment, and suddenly we've got an incredible opportunity here that is actually more dollars and more efficient, a better ROI to spend on computers than additional equipment. So let's move on. So here's the next question for everyone, and I'm sure there's some engineer in the audience that knows the answer to this question really well. Right? Anybody? Engineers? 80%, right? Think about that for a second. I want you to go to your boss and say, I'm just going to be 80% efficient today, and get a pat on the back as you walk out the door. Right? Does that sound like that's a good accomplishment? But the reality is that when you design offices like that, that is the absolute best you can do. You cannot satisfy 100% of people when you start designing an office like that. And in fact, every time we start putting people in an office like that, they start trying to figure out ways to get out of an office like that. So this guy must have a really good back and a really long extension cord to get effective. And in fact, why not just take the whole desk with you? All right? Why don't we migrate across? So I'll do a little field test right now. So who's comfortable in this space? Raise your hand. Oh boy, we've got a bad designer in this room. Better call him up. Who is cold right now? Oh, great, that's fantastic, because I am just dying of heat, so I'm just going to walk over. Everyone's cold. And gosh, look at that. I am now comfortable, right? Simply because I got up and moved. So what if we start thinking about our offices as a way of solving thermal comfort by actually moving around, by not staying put and staying in place? So this is our home office in Seattle, and we came up with this hypothesis. Let's go find a really old, crappy building, bad facade, with some radiators on the side and these really cool operable windows. And let's design the space as if there is no definition of comfort. Let's see what we can do. What happens to the space? So the first thing we did is we said, well, gosh, if I'm going to design it like there's no air conditioning system, I'm going to start to design my floor plan as if it's a site plan, right? So actually overlaying the floor plan within Google Earth to try to identify what are the spaces within our floor plan that are actually going to be too hot or too cold, and we can actually find a balance. Can we find 10% of the floor plan that's too hot, 10% of the floor plan that's too cold, and give everybody a chance to move around, and suddenly we can get 100% comfort, So that's the theory, at least, and we're still working on progress. But here's our summer space. You see there's no workstations, there's no permanent workstations located within the space. It's a great opportunity to catch a breath of fresh air and walk over to the window and enjoy a nice summer day. During the wintertime, those two spaces are actually the coldest and the hottest in the reverse condition. And in the wintertime, if you are actually too cold, actually get up and walk, burn some calories, find a time to actually improve your comfort by simply just walking over to the treadmill and the station itself. From a daylighting perspective, think about this as another challenge, another flip around, how often are we actually designing our spaces to have 100% daylight all the time? Is it actually too bright for people sometimes? I mean, I know that's hearsay from a green building consultant to say daylighting is bad, but the reality is if we gave everybody a little bit less desk space so that their permanent workspace was always in the daylit zone, scrunch it down, we actually have more space then to provide opportunities when it's okay to be not in a fully daylit environment, and actually get up and move around and have meetings that are standing meetings, right? The old military standing meeting. Or a spot in the back of the office that turns into a very quiet, calming area that actually lets you get away from the hustle and the bustle of the city. What if you just went outside? What if we got rid of walls entirely? You can go up to the roof of our building and actually take a break. And if we don't need walls, why do we need walls inside the building? The second you put up walls, what do you need? Air conditioning, fire alarm, all the things are really expensive. Doors are really expensive. So instead of a reception area, what if you had a collaboration zone that was sitting right there? What if you turned your kitchen into a work area where you're actually breaking bread around work versus breaking bread with bread? I think that works. And what if your lounge is actually a place for employees rather than for your guests? So you're probably thinking, oh, that's crazy. We can't have an office with no walls, right? But look at Maxwell Smart invented the idea. It's called the cone of silence. It descends from the sky, and you have a quiet conversation. It's actually, if you go on the web, it's a really cute video. But why don't we turn our permanent offices? This is our CEO's office, and he's there maybe 10% of the time. 90% of the time, he's not there. So our cone of silence is the CEO's office. It's okay to walk in and have it. And what about this one, right? This is called the mobile cone of silence, right? And it's fantastic. And is it really any different than that? FaceTime and a small office booth that allows our staff to talk to each other? So again, the challenge that I have for you is don't accept that 80% of people can be comfortable as a good design guide. That's ludicrous. Accept the fact that we have the technology that's now mobile, we have the furniture that allows you to do that piece, so why are we still designing spaces that do that? So I'm going to challenge all of you to go back and start thinking about, do I really need to design walls anymore? Is it that important? So here's another question, my last question for all of you. What percent of millennials consider working for a responsible company core to their happiness? Core to their happiness. Half? 90? Pretty good, 70%. Now, here's a follow-up question for you. How many would take a 15% pay cut to work for a responsible company? %47% would take a pay cut. So we actually have really efficient staff inside our office because we give them all a pay cut once we saw this. But the reality is what it tells you is you have the opportunity to attract talent simply by how innovative your workplace is, how much it actually speaks to the generation that you're trying to solve for. So what's fascinating about the millennial generation is that everyone complains they're lazy, entitled, narcissists who still live with their parents, right? Does that explain millennials? Well, here's another scary fact for you. When they started work, the planet was at 7 billion people. When they quit work, the planet will be at 9 billion people. This one generation is going to be responsible for solving a $2 billion gain to the earth. Scary, right? So if we don't start designing for people to get engaged in their work, we're all going to be in trouble. So we should be solving for them who will solve for us at this point in time. So this is a millennial's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right? So what do they do with that stuff, right? They walk over to this guy, and they don't get scared or don't get stage fright when they have to dispose of this stuff. It's actually part of who they are. Every millennial that's hit the workforce has grown up recycling. Think about it for a second. If you aren't recycling, you're disengaging people, right? You're disengaging the future of the workplace. So again, here's a sample of our office. I said, okay, well, how many different control points is it possible to engage millennials in their workplace? And you can do all kinds of crazy stuff in our office. Turn the lights off, fans, shades, blinds, earphones, monitors. Right? That's all interior stuff. It's not very exciting. So we did a little exercise, and we said, okay, well, what if we tried to re-envision an entire building built for millennials? What would the sucker look like? So here it is, right? And guess what happens? When the temperature's nice outside, that happens, right? So think about it. If you're a millennial that wants to work for a core business, your building is a billboard for sustainability. It's unlike any other workplace because the building actually transforms. Pretty sound, pretty phenomenal, right? Pretty scary. Ooh, naturally ventilated skyrise. Can you actually do it? You can. This is the PNC Tower, or the tower at PNC Plaza that just opened up last September. This is a building that was designed with millennials in place and active, healthy design standards. It's a building in which you can actually walk to a double skin facade and literally open a door and get out into a cavity and get a breath of fresh air on any floor in the entire building. Right? Talk about active design. If you want to, old buildings, you got to go down 20 flights of stairs. Who's going to do that? This allows you to actually take a break, get a breath of fresh air, and walk through the building. What if we designed an atrium that was more of a park? So you actually had a chance to go find a unique spot within the building if it's 20 below outside. Well, what if it was only 50 degrees inside? And it actually was a refreshing experience, gave you a different opportunity to work within the inside. And so this is their park. It's on the 26th floor, Mike? 28th floor. And this is a park for their employees, for them literally to get a breath of fresh air and work up there. And it's really quite incredible. It's got the most crystal clear. You literally feel like Superman floating above Pittsburgh to save the world. Right? That's what a millennial starts to think about. And I think every building's got to get one of these. This is an energy meter, a water meter, an indoor air quality meter. This visibly, as you walk into work every morning, you get an opportunity to see how well is your building performing. So that's the challenge I have for you, is that if we want millennials to save us, let's give them a better office environment that actually saves them and gives Greg's family a job, right? That's really important. And that's the answer, right? Technology, pay attention to the technology trends, pay attention to the mobility trends, and pay attention to the future. And then we'll go back to Stuart, or to Maxwell Smart, right? We'll solve our rottenness problem. So here we go. How would I do? Did Maxwell Smart really predict the future work? Apparently no one. I'm doing pretty good so far. Feeling pretty good, a little less good. All right, Greg, are we ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think everyone needs to come up and join the Soapbox. We're being recorded, so the Soapbox has got a microphone. It's fantastic up there. The view is great.
I have a question. Do you know of any research that's connected these trends that you just talked about to the people number, to improved productivity, to improved retention or attraction? Is there any hard data out there that shows that yet?
There is data. We're still crunching the numbers as far as whether it's emerging or whether we would call it evidence-based at this point. But there is definitely a link. So we'll get back to you on that one when we can say it definitively. But there is a link. And there's a link certainly also to improved mental health. which we can then say leads to better job satisfaction, which then leads to staff retention. So I think we can join the pieces. We can take you along that road. So yes.
I mean, I guess I would ask the question, why wait?
No, we wouldn't wait.
So-
you should do it.
I mean, I think that's one of the challenges that we have. We're going to go in the next 25 years, we're working from 7 billion to 9 people. If we wait for all the data to be empirical
Yep.
and don't experience the buildings that we're talking about, when you walk these buildings, you get it. You have to get it.
So I would add to that, don't wait, build it now, and please measure it so that we can then answer the question. Evaluate the projects that you're doing, because that's how we build the evidence base. So.
And you asked, how do we measure the productivity? Well, a common question back to a client is, well, how do you measure productivity now? And be ready for the crickets, right? Because they're not sure how to go after something that nebulous, but there's so many other factors, like the ones you're mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at absenteeism, you can look at presenteeism, which is where people are there but not really working. All of those numbers exist. All of those numbers are data that you can measure. And obviously, if you see a change, then you can begin to talk about changes in those numbers.
Yeah, like Yahoo looking at just login data.
Yeah.
So we need to get more people engaged in this.
Yeah. You can also talk about qualitative stuff. You know, you can actually ask people whether they're happier, whether they feel more productive. It doesn't just have to be numbers. It actually can be emotional responses. We can measure that too. I'm an architect and a developer. This is not what I do, but it's what we do. And I think that that's really important because it's what all of you do. You all create these spaces. Just because you don't think of yourself as a researcher doesn't mean you're not doing it. So I think it's really important to just begin to kind of see yourself as someone who is changing people's behavior. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question that, I love seeing successful, efforts to try to get to a goal, but I'm also interested in train wrecks and your experiences that you've had in trying to implement this creative office space that didn't work and what you've learned from it.
Sure. You want to?
Yes. When there's going to be a time of change, your choices of how to handle that change within an organization have to do with how much effort you put into it and when you put in the effort, right? And so your choices are to tell them, sell them, or engage them. And the tell them approach is really easy to do. Don't do anything. Keep it a super big secret, whatever you're planning at the office, and then just sort of pop it at them. So I was having dinner in New Jersey one night with a couple of architects and designers from a large company. They had about 5,000 people in Los Angeles. And during dinner, he takes out this thing, and he goes like, crap. All 5,000 employees were told with one email that they were going to be moving to new offices in Texas. Yeah, so LA is not the same as Texas, and that dawned on people pretty quickly, right? But but that's the tell them approach, right? And the sell them approach is your other option, which is, and I think this explains those signs on the back of bathroom doors, right? That say, be sure to sign up for softball, get your timesheets done. And by the way, we're moving to Plano, Texas, okay? But the engagement approach is what we're seeing with more and more leading companies, where they're getting their people involved in the process to get a better result, but to get that kind of buy-in. Because to get great belief and understanding, your choices are proof or experience. And you can keep piling on proof, but we've seen where that gets people. Mm-hmm. Once they experience it and get involved, they have a very different solution. So without describing like those specific train wrecks, and they train wrecks, but they exist. It's almost always when something is just tossed on a group versus when they're involved and really understand it. What are you saying?
I would add one more piece, which is just wait a little bit. So when we moved for our offices, we went from a very pretty standard cubicles, green building consultants cubicles, to kind of this open office environment. And I consider our staff to be millennials, and I'm thinking, this is great. I'm going to show up. We're going to open this thing on day one. I'm not going to hear a single complaint. I'm going to ride off into the sunset. Nice pat on the back, and we're going to go. It's not the reality, right? The reality is it takes a little bit of time for people to experience the space to kind of get it. And so, yeah, the first 3 days, I got 50 emails from people that had some complaint that they wanted to air. 2 weeks later, I only had 10. 3 months later, I only had 3, and I don't hear any anymore. It's because they have to relearn the way that their thinking work and relearn the way they engage in the space. And that their first response is, gosh, I'm uncomfortable. What am I going to do? This is a crappy place to work. It's, gosh, I got this incredible spot in the back. Now, the challenge that I think the error that we made in our space is we just didn't have enough phone booths. We do so much work now that is through FaceTime or Skype or Join Me, or we've got 3 different video conferencing softwares. And so we find those spaces are the ones that get the most use, and it's usually one-on-one interactions. So what we would do is we build a few more phone booths in the space, but we certainly would still kick our CEO out of his office. We still design the space without walls. That type of thing.
Another approach that we've done on a larger scale, so we don't just work in workplaces, we work kind of neighborhood scale, is to pilot stuff, is to try stuff, to just use something that's very temporary, some paint, some planters, just something that you can kind of create a new space, like a plaza, for instance, in New York. Do that, and then it doesn't feel as threatening. People can then have their input, they can try it, and then if they like it, obviously you can make it permanent. If they don't like it, you've invested very little and you haven't had to deal with a kind of backlash. I mean, we saw a lot of lawsuits when we first wanted to try to start to do bike lanes, plazas, and so on in New York, which is where I come out of. And the lawsuits were all reacting to things that people were considering would happen or thought might happen: loss of business, loss of, I don't know, another parking space, all of these things that people feared, but they didn't have anything to actually base the fears on. So by actually building the plazas in a temporary way, and then again measuring the results, of course, we were able to say, actually, retail has a 172% increase in sales around this plaza, not the negative impact that you thought. And then, of course, you don't need to convince anybody, because it's done. It's done it for you. And I think the same goes for the workplace. To do things, let people have their input, let them have their say, let them try it, because you're going to very quickly see if it works. Because you don't want to build something that doesn't work. I mean, what's the point of imposing, like, this is the design that's perfect if it's not perfect? So I think that that's where you can be more flexible. And I think this idea of having spaces that offer you a lot of different opportunities for different working environments gives you the opportunity to be more flexible.
It's a lot easier to change furniture around than it is hard walls in a space. It's a lot cheaper. And I think, and the other thing is that there are enough good examples out there that you can learn from other people's train wrecks, right? You just got to go find them. And I think one of the most successful things that we do as consultants is we give them the experience of what it's like to see something actually work versus trying to convince them through a white paper, it really will work, right? So I think challenging everyone to go out and find the examples of the things that you think might work, they're out there. They're almost in every city. They're a little tough to find because no one's actually publishing all the good white papers. I agree.
And there's also a change happening in facilities' willingness to change. So you think of what it was like in the 80s and 90s, an organization would put in an enormous cubicle farm, right? Let's call it what it is, right? It's ice cube trays. So it's all down here. And the attitude was, now that this is installed, by God, don't touch it ever, right? In fact, most of those installs are still there. Now, wait, this, full disclosure, our company's the one that made most of those cubicles, right? But now something gets installed and it's a pilot, as you're describing it, and there's a much greater willingness to, let's take a look at this in 6 months or a year. Do we have the right balances of these things, right? And can we make these shifts and have these changes occur in much faster time, which is a good match for how much more quickly businesses and technology are changing as well. So let's have these facilities be a little more agile and resilient that way.
Sure. Do you have another question?
Hi there. I guess I'm representing the millennial impatience or whatever adjective you want to ascribe to us. But I'm curious, a lot of the trends that you've spoken about are kind of like already here. So we know about biophilia, nature in the space. We know about air quality and access to light. So I'm curious, what are the trends that you maybe weren't so confident about putting on those slides, and like the ones that in 10 or 20 years, the things that we really need to be thinking about?
Sure.
That's a great question because that's a millennial, right? Right? Millennials know the answer. It's on the iPhone. It's absolutely right. And I think that's the challenge. The question speaks to the challenge that we all face, right? Millennials know the answer. They do know the answer, but they aren't getting the audience of the designers to actually listen to them and implement them and have the audacity to change the way you're doing your work and think about your work. And there's so many organizations out there that are so fixed, they're still in their cubes, right? It's time to refresh. It's time to hit the reboot button. So, what's the next trend out there? Gosh, I just want to solve the first one to a certain degree. But I think, to answer this question more directly, the next trend is, do we need an office? Or do we need a coffee shop?
And we've seen some things go out there, it's like this assumption that you're all the same in your age group, right? And that what you really need are bright colors and a lot of goofy stuff, right? So I'm working with a group of engineers one time, and they're looking at doing a pilot project, and they said, look, don't give us just another Gen Y nightmare. And what they were describing was it was supposed to look like kindergarten or something like this. And another group of engineers said, look, we really need some spaces to focus, and you can't make us more innovative just by forcing us to sit on red poofs. Right, good point. So that would be just like assuming that any of these generations are all the same. It's down to the engagement of what do you do, where do you do it, who should you do it with, right? And what are those kinds of ideal things? And we're seeing this. Ask all of you, have you ever worked from home? For a whole day? Okay, awesome. So did you honestly sit in the same chair for 10 hours? So I'm getting mostly, well, no, right? Because you probably started there doing some email, and then you took some phone calls on the deck. Had something to read, so you sat in a comfortable chair. Other 6 hours are walking to and from the laundry room. But was your boss there, though, to watch you and say, hey, it looks like you're about to do some reading. Why don't you find a comfortable chair? Or did you figure that out on your own? Right. So more and more offices are being built with some of those same kinds of choices. And you can find the best place to do your work. Because you can work from just about anywhere now, but you need to work from somewhere. So where would you want that somewhere to be? What would be the best place? So get up, be active, move to that place.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in a nutshell is the office of the future, in that it is ever morphing. You have options. I feel like that's what you're talking about here. Like, we're still going to be human beings. We're still going to respond in the same way to the same triggers. We're still going to like trees and sunshine and walking around and seeing people and interacting with other people. We're social animals. So these are the things that are constant. Where we actually choose to have those interactions or choose to work, they can be anything, really. But they aren't going to be so very different from what the nicest spaces are today are going to still be the nicest spaces. We're still going to respond to them. I mean, someone asked me, what's the best example of active design? And I typically say Grand Central Station, which surely wasn't done recently. But so why do I say it's Grand Central? And it's because design is being used to entice you up those stairs. And that's where design comes in. We can have joy in the way that it's designed. It can make you want to do things. And I feel like that's the same in any place that's well designed, is that it gives you that joy. You discover something you haven't seen before. You make a connection with something that you hadn't made a connection before. And I feel like design is the same. We respond in the same way to design, whatever generation we are, whenever. Beautiful is still beautiful. Spaces that make you feel happy or positive or secure or whatever it is you need. But I feel like you do need the option to go and find different things when you need different places to be in, So sometimes I want to be in a quiet space. Very rarely, actually, people who know me. But sometimes you do want to be in those quiet spaces on your own. Other times you want to be in a space where it's loud and it is boisterous and it has toys and so on. And I feel like where the stress starts to come in is when you can't control that. When you don't have control over that, that's when you start to see elevated stress levels, because people want options.
And I also think what we're not saying is that every office needs to have every single type of environment under the sun. I think that's why you get so many confusing white papers out there about which is debating about is it the pool table or the picnic table in the office. So I think every company is different. Every company's values are different. And if you start with the values that you're trying to promote in your company and embed those in the types of spaces and the options that you have the ability to cull the universe of options down to ones that actually matter and are impactful to your business.
Are we done? Oh, no.
Do one more.
You've been talking about innovation and sort of creativity, but you've been also at the same time sort of mocking the goofy design approaches. So what kind of trends on encouraging creativity or innovation have you noticed in the workspace design?
Let's see, a whole number of things. And it gets back down to, like we talked about a moment ago about how you wouldn't want to treat all of Gen Y as the same, or all of baby boomers the same, right? The same thing would be true of people of different nationalities. You wouldn't say everybody from this country acts the same. And the same thing's true of people from different kinds of work. I mean, there's engineers and lawyers and doctors that we can learn from them as a whole, but inside of any organization, there are going to be uniquenesses that need to be applied. So once you understand that the content experts are inside the building, they're not probably people that you're shipping in, and what you can draw from them. So once you understand with a group what they're trying to do for a business, what are their critical success factors, you open up all the right questions for what are the right ways to support that. So the one that you just mentioned, having a much, much broader range of settings for people to choose from. So when they're trying to work with another group of people, is the room supporting that? Is the right technology and all those aspects have to match up with what needs to get done? The old-fashioned way to design a conference room was you put big room, big table, right? 14 chairs around it, and it's always in use all the time by 3 people on one end. So you couldn't get into that conference room either, right? So to have the right kinds of choices, I mean, look there's so many different forms of collaboration. So let's not try to treat all those the same as well.
Yeah.
And I think we are right on our time. Could we thank all of our panelists here? This was really a nice discussion.